last time I was here was actually almost 3 years ago, and the last time I was back home in Ireland is almost 2.5 years ago. So it shows you how busy my current position has been and has prevented me to come back more often. And I'm delighted to meet also old friends here too from my days in Brussels. If there's one issue which certainly is a permanent feature of relations between the EU and the Balkan region, it is never take anything for granted. Even if one has already established agreements, reconciliation processes, and that it requires very careful nurturing, it requires a lot of work to ensure that that agreement is deeply ingrained in the society, in the democratic process. I say this because in the country where I'm posted now, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, we had a crucial landmark agreement reached in 2001, the Ohrid Framework Agreement, which marked the end of an interethnic conflict, and which for all of us, and of course the EU and NATO and the international community played a pivotal role in getting the different factions together. But it gave us hope for the future, and certainly for many years it was the framework in which progress was made in that country. But sadly, in the recent years, we have seen that even those issues that we had thought resolved in 2001 resurfaced. So again, it emphasized the crucial importance of a permanent commitment. And the European Union's commitment to the Balkans is and must remain a permanent one. It is the only way that we can ensure that the Balkan region, the countries individually, will gradually adopt all the principles and values on which the European Union integration process is based, and will ensure full respect of democratic rights and practices, and guarantee prosperity and stability for the citizens of each of the countries. Very complex countries, as you all know, multi-ethnic societies emerging from recent conflicts, and therefore the post-conflict reconciliation process remains of crucial importance. And of course, the only thing that can guarantee a long-term success is maintaining the European Union perspective, the perspective of joining the European Union. So whenever there is a statement by one or other leader of the European Union which might put into question that commitment, you can imagine the impact it has within the Balkan region itself. And of course, when the Lisbon Treaty received a negative vote in Ireland, this sent some shivers, understandably, in the Balkan region. And coming from Ireland, I explained to them the reasons behind them. I referred to the Nice precedent, where even my brother had voted no. And although he voted no this time as well, actually, but I think I've convinced him that now next time he must vote yes. And
2 strikes and you're out.
So it is important, and I'm sure that all the personalities from the EU will have told you this from the EU institutions, but the Council or Commission, that the European Union commitment to the Balkans is important to ensure long-term stability in that process, and also, at the end of the day, a reconciliation that is deeply ingrained in society. The European Union continues to pursue its twin-track approach. On the one hand, fostering regional cooperation, very much along the lines of the Thessaloniki Agenda of 2003, as well as the declaration adopted in 2006 in Salzburg by the EU foreign ministers. And we've seen some credible success in those areas. Central European Free Trade Agreement, which has been instrumental in bringing down some of the administrative trade barriers between the countries of the region, enhancing regional trade, which was a very weak point before, and this also, if it continues like that, creates a more politically positive environment to resolve the more difficult political issues. And also other areas that are now being focused on by the European Union, promoting regional cooperation in the transport area, where we will have hopefully a common transport agreement which will bring together all the countries of the region, and so forth. And then there's another important issue at the regional level which has such an important impact, and that is the visa restrictions. If there's one issue that I am confronted with every day when I walk around the streets of Skopje or any other city in the country, it is when are we going to have the system we had before, where we could travel without restrictions to the EU member countries. And certainly we all understand, of course, why visa restrictions were established in the first place. But there is no doubt that it has meant that a new generation of citizens have never had the opportunity to travel to the European Union, and therefore don't know how other societies, other cultures and so on in the European Union live, and therefore being able to bring that back into their country themselves and being a critical mass which doesn't exist in many countries. So we are very happy that visa liberalisation process is ongoing, and certainly if there's one issue where the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia has demonstrated strong commitment, it is in the reforms that are necessary in order to achieve full visa liberalisation. These reforms were established by the EU, a sort of visa liberalisation roadmap, biometric passports, ensuring that each country has a security of documents in place, in other words, ensuring no fraud of passport documents, identity documents, etc., integrated border management procedures and all that. And in all those areas, definitely, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia has been the one that has achieved the most progress. On the biometric passports, they have already issued some 500,000. That is a remarkable achievement for a country of 2 million people. And so we are hoping that the European Commission, when it finalises its assessment done on the basis of expert visits to the region, we are hoping that it will present a positive assessment for certainly what the government in Skopje has done, but also for what Serbia has done as well, and then others are also on the way. But it's very important that each country's merits must be judged on its own, and that the country's way ahead should not have to wait for the country's way behind. So we are hoping that the Commission, in its report next month or beginning of June, it will issue a positive recommendation, and hopefully we will have a positive decision for visa liberalisation. And this will send a very, very important, tangible message to the citizens of their closeness to the European Union and the perspective into the European Union. So now, and of course the problem of visa liberalisation is that the foreign ministries of the member countries will always say, yes, yes, we all agree, but then you go to the interior ministers and they're a little bit more hesitant. So there really is an important work of lobbying that has been done. The European Parliament has been a great advocate for visa liberalisation because they understand the problems and the restrictions that this imposes on the Balkan countries. So, coming to the country that I know the best, I guess, because I have been there now posted since November 2005. This is a country that had made some remarkable steps towards a viable democratic society, multi-ethnic society, despite the enormous challenges it faced. 1999, as you know, it was the host of 330,000 refugees because of the Kosovo crisis. And then in 2001, we had the outbreak of the conflict between the communities, the ethnic Albanian community, who felt that its rights were not properly respected. And thanks to the intervention of Solana and others, we had the Ohrid Framework Agreement. And that continued, and the implementation was so successful that the European Union decided that, as a recognition of the enormous efforts of the political leaders of the time, that candidate status would be granted to them in December 2005. And I arrived at that moment just a month before, and I must say there was great optimism that the country was a real model of multi-ethnic cooperation, was demonstrating the capacity to overcome these difficult issues of the past and to move forward in fulfilling all the reforms that are necessary for the EU accession process, the Copenhagen criteria. Then we had the elections in 2006. From the technical point of view, these elections were deemed by the OSCE as having met most of the standards of the international community. All of these elections were always observed by the OSCE ODIHR, ODIHR organization based in Warsaw. And so this was fine, but it meant a change of government, fine. And then we had a totally new political environment. A new prime minister who had a very ambitious and a very encouraging focus on economic development, on fight against corruption, but very weak on the political dimension. And that weakness, unfortunately, became more and more visible as we progressed into 2006 and early 2007. And it became so bad that the Prime Minister and the political leaders only agreed to meet, and the Prime Minister only agreed to meet with all the political leaders, including the ethnic Albanians, if we, the European Union, myself and the US Ambassador, would facilitate these meetings. So we had to facilitate meetings where they would meet to try and deal with some of the difficult issues where the main ethnic Albanian party that had emerged from the 2006 elections, that was not brought into the coalition, felt that its rights were not being respected, and that all that had been achieved by 2001 Ohrid Framework Agreement was being put into question. And there is no doubt that, as I said at the very beginning, many of the issues that we had thought resolved by the Ohrid Framework Agreement re-emerged, and the old wounds reopened. And then we had boycotts of the parliament, which has been unfortunately a recurring feature of the politics in that country. So we had quite a considerable 4-month boycott by the main ethnic Albanian party during 2007. So the whole political context of development was severely affected, and it required a lot of work, a lot of persuasion to really get the different groups together. After the elections, in my first meeting with the Prime Minister, I pleaded with them to have at least a dialogue with all the leaders of the other minority communities and the ethnic Albanian, but it took him 3 months before he actually agreed to meet the leader of the main ethnic Albanian party. And this caused a lot of difficulty. And that first meeting, face to face, again, I had to facilitate so that they would at least establish a dialogue. And it was quite fascinating because the first issues that were discussed in that were about the conflict, about the past. And this was good because it helps to overcome and to move forward, go beyond the prejudices and create a personal relationship. So this went on for quite some time, and the Prime Minister's approach, while laudable, where he said that success in the economic reforms would have positive dividends for the political dimension, for the multi-ethnic aspects, but unfortunately he underestimated the amount of investment that was required in order to deal with the political inter-ethnic issues. So this continued through 2007, and then in March 2008 Commissioner Rehn came and expressed his concern, but he said if a number of key reforms were achieved by the country during the course of 2008, we would be in a position, we the Commission, to recommend a date for opening negotiations. And these were key reforms: independence of the judiciary, fight against corruption, depoliticisation of public administration, ensuring a viable, consistent, regular political dialogue between all the parties, no more boycotts, etc. So there was really a clear focus of the minds of the government on what needs to be done. Then we had the summit of the NATO summit in Bucharest, where the result you know, and this prompted the Prime Minister to call for early elections, against the advice of many leaders in the country. And I must say, we all, of course, it's not for us to say what they should do, but we did suggest that if the government must fulfil all the reforms in time for the Commission to make a recommendation, early elections might not perhaps be the best way to go about it. Nevertheless, it was decided, and we had an observation mission, and these elections were a major disaster because we had violence, we had 1 death, 10 injured, many irregularities, and this certainly greatly affected the democratic credentials of the country and was a major setback. And of course, by then it was clear that there was no way that the Commission could have enough arguments to grant a recommendation for opening negotiations. So after the elections, we had a government reinforced majority, and we felt, well, perhaps now this majority will be used wisely. But unfortunately, during July, we had and this is reflected in the Commission's report of November of 2008, we had a situation where 172 items of legislation were adopted by emergency procedure. Now, emergency procedure in the Parliament is used normally only in times of natural disasters, epidemics, or of major crisis, and we were not facing a major crisis. But nevertheless, that emergency procedure was used, and this certainly affected the overall democratic climate, and we had boycott of opposition parties, and the new government was voted into office on the 26th of July with no opposition party present. So this sent a very negative message, and there we had a major effort to try and encourage all the leaders to come together, to work together, and so on, and to really focus on these reforms that could help to bring the country forward. We also had, unfortunately, very difficult relations between the Prime Minister and the President, because the Prime Minister systematically refused to accept the authority of the President and never addressed him as President, always addressed him as citizen Mr. Zarankowski, because he did not recognise the legitimacy of the election of the President. And this has been a feature of presidential elections up to this one in the country. And this did not help for the overall political climate in resolving some of the key issues, the accession process to EU-NATO, the name issue, etc. So the Commission's report of November set out very clearly what was expected of the government, and we hoped that they would focus on these major reforms and the need to ensure the best possible standards for the next elections, which took place just 2 months ago. Presidential and local elections. Presidential elections are 2 rounds, and for these elections it was agreed that the threshold of the number of voters would be reduced, because in a number of countries the threshold for electing president is some 50%. In these elections it was brought down to 40%. That was just barely achieved, 42.5%, of which there were over 6% of invalid ballots, but are still counted to meet the threshold of the number of people who went out to vote. This reflected perhaps the fact that the whole campaign had not captured the excitement of the citizens, and also to a certain extent perhaps that the Albanian community did not feel that the candidates on offer would be ones that would truly represent the interests of the ethnic Albanian community. The local elections were, of course, very hard, fought in a tough way because the decentralization process is one of the pillars of the Ohrid Framework Agreement. So there's a lot of power at the local level, and unfortunately, there, in that respect, the conclusion of the ODIHR is not as positive as one would have hoped. So the overall conclusion of the OSCE ODIHR for these elections was that they had met most of the OSCE Council of Europe commitments and standards, although some of the issues identified during the first round, including credible reports of intimidation, were of increased concern. And there's no doubt that this is what was the big issue, intimidation. And the ODIHR goes on to say that the ODIHR observation mission received an increasing number of troubling and credible reports of pressure on or intimidation of citizens, which seriously detracted from the overall quality of the election process. So this is something that really the government must address, because most of these intimidations were focused on state officials, emphasizing once again the highly politicized nature of public administration. And coming in terms of the decentralization process, which has achieved so much success, there will be a major effort required now by the government to ensure that they can address this issue and foster a much stronger public administration which is free from the political interference that we had up to now. So what are the main challenges ahead now in the next months and the next year? Certainly, of course, the country is, and we hope, will achieve enough progress on the reforms, those benchmarks that the Commissioner had presented in March of last year that are as valid today as they were then, as much progress on those benchmarks to enable the Commission to make a recommendation. Political dialogue, and there we look forward now with the new President who will take up office on the 12th of May. We do hope that there will be a credible effort to foster a strong political dialogue at all levels and ensure proper functioning of the Parliament, adoption of laws on the basis of consultations and as much as possible in a spirit of consensus, which was sadly lacking over the past months and years. Another important challenge will be continuing the implementation of the Ohrid Framework Agreement. This still remains the critical framework for long-term stability and reconciliation. And Dr. Solana, yesterday, when we were receiving the outgoing President, Czerwiankowski, at the press point made it very clear that the Ohrid Framework Agreement must be implemented right up to the end, and he repeated that twice. And the reason for that is that we are somewhat concerned at a number of trends that would tend to undermine some of the principles of the Ohrid Framework Agreement. Education especially. We have more and more incidents of segregated teaching, which goes contrary to the principle of the Ohrid Framework Agreement in promoting a multi-ethnic society. And the OSCE High Commissioner for National Minorities, who has been on yearly occasions visiting the country, and made very, very important recommendations. These have not been implemented in the way they should. Recommendations to promote extracurricular activities, to create this multi-ethnic climate at the school and education level. And failure to do that, of course, could create problems down the road in terms of maintaining the multi-ethnic character of the country. Another challenge will be, of course, depoliticizing of public administration, and there we keep reminding them of the examples such as Slovenia, where it was the professional public administration that drove the accession process and made sure that all the legislation that was going to Parliament for adoption linked to EU reforms was really legislation that responded to the needs of these reforms, was based on a consultation process with civil society, etc., and had the means to be implemented, because, as you know, the Commission bases its settlement not just on legislation adopted, but also on implementation. Judicial reform, where we're still lacking a clear independence of the judiciary. And, of course, clouding all of this is the current economic crisis. Unfortunately, we have to say that the government perhaps did not appreciate the extent of this crisis as it could have early enough. It has been taking now corrective measures, which, as the IMF officially stated, are a step in the right direction, but perhaps not enough. The rebalancing of the budget was adopted 2 weeks ago to reduce budget spending, and this will help to go some way towards the budget deficit, which now stands at 2.8% of GDP, but it could get worse. And of course, the problem is that the government still does not want to have an agreement with the IMF. And this is one of the only countries in the region that does not wish to go into an agreement with the IMF. We are encouraging them to do so, and we hope they will, in order to ensure that they can have at least a safety net for the crisis as it sinks in, and which no doubt it will. The country is very much dependent on foreign investment. It has invested major and credible efforts in encouraging foreign investors, but now, of course, because of the crisis, these have diminished. Another reason, of course, is the regulatory environment, which still needs to be strengthened in order that foreign investors can have clarity that their investments will be free from any political interference. So this is a menu of challenges. It's certainly doable and it's achievable. And as the outgoing president has said so many times, and all of us, the country has the capacity and the political will to address these issues. What it needs, of course, is to make sure that that political will remains a consistent one, so that all of those reforms are really achieved, and that the Commission would be able then to make a recommendation for opening negotiations. But it requires a consistent effort, and we are in regular contact all the time with the government, with civil society, all of these important actors in the country. And civil society is very keen to see the country move forward, but there again, there has been a reluctance on the part of the current government to engage with civil society unless that civil society fully endorses all the programs of the governing party. And the final point I wanted to say was that as Tony had mentioned, the institutional innovation which my nomination reflected, which is representing both Council and Commission, it was an experiment in 2005. They were waiting to see how long I would stay standing with this experiment, but I'm happy to say that I am still standing. I've gone almost completely bald in the process, but I do believe that this model has worked, because we have been able to bring into play all the instruments that the EU has out in the field and to best use, coordinating a greater coordination between all these instruments, conflict prevention, conflict resolution, security aspects, together with the traditional development support, institutional capacity building, etc. And I am sure, I'm hoping that the lessons from the experience, from my experience, will help when hopefully the Lisbon Treaty will be ratified and enters into force, and we will have then the EU External Service, which has to be then implemented, and which will, in a sense, be more or less what I am doing now. So I am glad, at least, that in a very modest way the work we are doing will help in that long-term prospect in strengthening the role and capacity of the EU to act out in the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you.